My name's Pam Loring, and I'm with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Division of Migratory Birds in the North Atlantic Appalachian region. For the past year and a half, I've been working with Biodiversity Research Institute, the University of Rhode Island, and Birds Canada on a study funded by NYSERDA to develop field-tested protocols for using Motus offshore. This is the third stakeholder workshop we've hosted for this project, and we'll focus on the development of an offshore Motus portal for managing data within the Motus wildlife tracking system. So as we get started, I'd like to thank the project team from the Fish and Wildlife Service, Biodiversity Research Institute, University of Rhode Island, Birds Canada, and NYSERDA for making this work possible. The overall project goal is to develop standardized protocols for using automated radio telemetry to monitor birds and bats in offshore environments. The overall project includes the following components: a monitoring framework to help guide tagging efforts and study design for offshore Motus projects, a guidance document with specifications and workflows for offshore Motus stations, an online study design tool that allows developers to map detection coverage from their stations, a simulation study to model animal movement data for risk assessments, and a Motus data framework, including a centralized portal for data management, coordination, and summary reports. And this framework is the topic for today's workshop. So the goals of the workshop today are to introduce the Motus data framework, get some feedback on an offshore Motus portal that's currently being developed. We're specifically looking for feedback on the format of automated reports that will be generated from the portal. And to let folks know about opportunities for further engagement with this effort, including providing more detailed feedback on the data framework and helping to coordinate Motus data that you may be collecting for current offshore research and monitoring efforts. So to briefly review the agenda, Stu McKenzie and Luke Berrigan from Birds Canada will start us off with an overview of the offshore Motus data framework and a demo of the new portal that they are working on for this effort. A Q&A will follow the presentation, so please put any questions that you may have in the chat as they arise. We'll then take a 15-minute break with an opportunity to explore the portal on your own. At 2:10 Eastern, we'll organize into breakout groups with the aim of capturing any feedback on the automated report options in the portal. And then at 2:40, we will reconvene to discuss key feedback from the breakout groups with the larger group and briefly go over some next steps for the project. And then we'll plan to wrap things up by 3 o'clock. So with that, I will turn things over to Stu and Luke for their presentation on Motus. Thanks, everyone.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Stu McKenzie, the Director of Migration Ecology at Birds Canada, and Lucas Berrigan, you can see as well as our Atlantic coordinator and also one of our data analysts. And just give me a second here and I'll load up my slides. I guess I gotta share my screen first. All right, you guys see in my notes or you see the presentation?
See your presentation, Stu.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so I'm going to provide a brief overview of the data framework and sort of how Motus works, and then I'll pass it over to Luke, who will take you on a demo of our new Explore data platform. I have both my kids home today, so forgive any background noise, but hopefully it'll be at a minimum. So just a very quick overview, assuming most people know what Motus is, but Motus is an international collaborative research network that uses coordinated automated radio telemetry facilitate the research and education on the ecology and conservation of migratory animals. And these are just some examples of spring and fall migrant thrushes through the system, most of which over land, but some offshore.
Hey, Stu. Right now, we can just see your PowerPoint application open. Can you start the slideshow? It doesn't appear to be started.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know you couldn't see it. Sorry about that. What are you looking at now?
Still see your application, but not the actual slideshow.
It's really weird. I think we've done this enough, right?
I think Zoom's just keeping you on your toes.
Yeah. Sorry, everybody. Notes are the real deal.
You're getting close. Now we got notes. Zinga.
Looks good.
Thanks. Everything I just said already, but here are the fancy animations to go along with it. So these are just thrushes moving through the system during spring and fall migration. Of course, most of these are over land, many offshore applications to this type of data as well. So just to rehash, Motus is a collaborative research network. We have users or collaborators tagging animals. Thank you, bud. All over the world, and those animals are being detected by automated receiver stations, and all the data is collated in the master Motus database, where it is then disseminated back to the collaborators, made available through a public interface, stored and shared with other movement repositories. And of course, the whole point of this is to inform conservation science, whether that be basic discovery, policy and management, public engagement and education, and ultimately conservation action. And we've done quite well so far. This is just the number of Motus stations currently to date. Obviously, a large concentration in the Northeast, where the system began and where the focus of our workshop is today. And we've come a long way since sort of a drawing on a sketchboard in university. There's over 1,200 stations. 400 projects have used the system to date, and over 30,000 animals of more than 250 species. And that's created quite an abundance of data that we are now collating and combining to be able to make use of it for a number of applications, including offshore wind. So that brings us to why we're here today. As Pam said, the goals are to build a collaboration platform and data hub for all wind power projects utilizing Motus, ensure open and robust data access, storage, and standardization, provide summary level reports of information needed for offshore wind assessments at site-specific and regional levels, and then coordinate timely access to detailed data or summary reports. And forgive me for my presentation here is one of the wordiest, bland ones I've ever put together. So why join in a collaborative framework in terms of a wind collaborative? One is the use of the data management tools available through Motus. So all metadata and detection data management is already organized in a transparent and open fashion. It allows the sharing of metadata and detection data across projects or stations, and that also creates transparency both in the collection and sharing of those data. Motus is designed as a positive feedback loop for information and participation. So the more people that are participating, the more data everybody gets, and it's just this beautiful positive feedback loop, an ultimate example of scientific altruism. It allows the data to provide a broader contribution to conservation science beyond the point-specific information that we may be interested in. It puts all the data in a permanent data archive, and there may or may not be legislative requirements in other areas that require data to be housed in either a permanent archive or an open framework such as Motus. So for projects that are wishing to join the Offshore Wind Collaborative or a part of the project, step one is to register with Motus, and then you'll be prompted to create a project. And part of that process as well allows you to assign a group. Now currently, there are a number of different options which allow collaborators to manage their projects. You can manage your citation, which allows to say who's going to be cited for that project. If that data is ever used or shared, it kind of becomes a project label. Data sharing, you can right off the hop say all my data is open, anybody can have it, or you can only select to share summary data, which is open anyway, just by the nature of Motus. And then currently it's labeled as administration, but that's really where the group is at the bottom, where you can select what group to put your project in. And the Atlantic Ocean Offshore Wind Assessment is one of those groups. So the Motus collaboration policy is intended to maximize the efficacy of Motus data for science conservation and wildlife and resource management. It's basically to get the biggest bang for our collective buck. And by registering a receiver or a tag with Motus, collaborators are agreeing to the terms of this policy. But as you go through the motions of Motus, you're flagged numerous times. Just check this box. Yes, I've read the collaboration policy, and that's available on the website. And the most important aspect of all of this is open data. So all tag metadata, station metadata, and summary detection data. So basically what I usually refer to it as the equivalent of banding data. So what individuals were tagged at what station at a given time is available for public visualization, downloaded and for use in augmented data products. What's not open is the detailed detection data. So every single detection and the signal strength and information about what antenna those detections are on, which is required for more detailed analysis. And data is only available for registered collaborators. And currently we're revising the collaboration policy, but which will probably keep that data closed for up to 3 years, maybe 5 before everything becomes open. So the project management and reporting tools that we've been developing for the offshore wind assessment has folded into a revamp of our Explore data tools altogether. So all of them manage the project management tools to manage your receiver metadata and the like are available currently in our Manage platform. And then on the right is the first sort of mock-ups of our Explore data tools that Luke will take you on a walk through shortly. So the Explore data portal really just provides all of the mechanisms to see your and other projects' data at whatever level or timeline you choose. And then from there will also be automated reports through a reporting tool that Luke will share with you, and a variety of options about how that data is presented to groups like yours that we'll be looking for feedback on to make sure we get it right. Lastly, all of the data that's being provided, there's basically 4 major ways that collaborators can get access to their data. The Motus R package in our book, which is where you get the access to all of the data. And in this situation, all data is made available, including any false positives and everything that's in there. And then there's other tools and guidelines to help users visualize and clean and then analyze those data. The online reporting tools and downloads are just public summary data at a very high level that are filtered at a high level to screen and remove any false positives or incorrect data. These screening tools are heavily dependent on user-defined metadata and management. So if there are users that haven't correctly inputted their metadata, that can really skew how these filters work. Publications are obviously the data is available through publications, and those are collaborator-driven, cleaned, and analyzed. And then augmented data projects are similar. They're cleaned and analyzed by whoever's organizing that major group. So that's kind of a high-level overview. Sorry for the last point here is covered up by my branding. But what we're looking for today, my title here should say Breakout Groups, is some initial feedback to the tools that we're going to show you. Please keep in mind that the Explore data tools we're going to share we've been focusing on function over fashion. So we will be releasing a demo in that function framework. There'll be a lot of work on the fashion in the future. So please keep your comments and feedback to functionality and information as opposed to aesthetics, although it is sort of simple and slick at the moment. We do want to focus on the target audience for automated reporting within your organization as collaborators, but also within the industry. Are we providing the information that is expected? And then what's the purpose of sort of the reporting that we're able to provide? And well, do you even require static reports? Are they useful, or can everything be dynamic or available through the website? Some aspects of the data are not so easily summarized in a static form, so we want to make sure we get that right. And gaps, anything missing, and would having access to public data tools incentivize summary level data sharing. Basically, are there any challenges or issues with the collaboration policy and data sharing as presented, or are there any incentives that we can provide to help things along? And I think that's all I've got. I told Luke I'd keep it under 10 minutes, and I did that barely. So if there's any comments or questions now, we can very briefly go over them before I hand it over to Luke. But I think we can. Just go over. Yeah, Kate,
I'll just start
with that.
I'll just start sharing my screen. Can everyone see that?
Hasn't loaded yet, Luke, on my end. And I just wanted to add too, if folks have questions during the presentation, definitely feel free to put them in the chat, and then we can go through all of the questions in the chat and any new questions during the Q&A at 1:40.
It's just still a black screen, Luke.
Black screen, hey?
Lucas Bergen has started sharing his screen. Please try again.
All right, yeah, it should work. Okay, so as Stu said, I'm just going to go over a couple of automated reporting tools that we have available, and you can sort of think of them as being two different types. One's going to be dynamic, like this one you see, and the other one's going to be static, something that you'd be like a PDF report, something you could email or print off. But we anticipate this to be the main tool that's being used. And just to give you a brief overview of what we are looking at here, this is like the station map, as you might be able to recognize. This is all the stations in the Motus network. And it gives you a top level view of everything in the Motus data set. The idea is that we're trying to keep everything sort of as top level as possible, and then have as many ways to get to that final data point that you're interested in. So you can navigate to the data that you're interested in through the stations. So if you're interested in what was detected at a station, for instance, it'd be easy. You just go to Explore Data, and then you click on one of the stations on the map. Hovering over a station gives you a brief summary of that station, including its name, what's been detected there, and how recently. Clicking on that station would bring you to a profile page for that station, which I'll get to in a moment. Further, it's colored to sort of demonstrate distribution of different frequencies within the network. So important to keep in mind that the technologies used in Motus operate on different frequencies. So certain transmitters, or the transmitter of a specific frequency, can only be received by a station that also is listening on that frequency. So by mapping out the colors by frequency, we can sort of get a sense of where different types of tags can be used. So we have in North America these two different frequencies, which is 166, that's our low tech tags, and then 434, which are cellular tracking technology tags. And then we have dual mode as well. And that means that these are stations that can detect both types of transmitters, both frequencies. And so this is a helpful tool just on the front, just to see the current distribution of maps, but you can also see historical distribution. So this toolbar up here is sort of common on all the pages. It changes slightly, but the idea is to keep things as similar as possible on every page you're navigating to. And so clicking on this icon produces a timeline where you can filter the data based on time and it will show you what you're selecting on the map. And you can drag it across. So this is a handy tool if you wanted to see the historical changes. For instance, a lot of folks just deploy their stations only seasonally. So this might give you a sense of what time, what to expect at different times of the year. You can go further here and open a station planning maps and actually add some prospective stations. So these are stations that other collaborators in different regions have indicated that they plan on installing at some point in the future. So this can be overlaid on top of the currently active stations if you choose to. And there's other features here, such as coordination regions. If you want to contact somebody in a certain region who's responsible for that area, that provides you that information. So as you can tell, like, this information is at your fingertips, but it's not going to be in your face right to start. Just try to keep things simple at all times. And so that's part of the trick here, is we're trying to, cater to a wide audience. So moving on, we have a further selection tool. So you could view a single station by clicking on it, but if you want to view a selection of stations, say around a geographic feature, you can use these polygon tools over here. You can draw a circle to select a number of stations that way, and then you can summarize those stations. You can also draw a polygon, and it'll select all the stations within that polygon and create a summary for you. So, but more relevant to the work that you'll be doing, because you'll be part of a project and part of a project group, you may be interested in viewing the data on that level as well. What's going on with my project, or what was going on with my project group? So here we've got a table of all the projects within Motus, and it tells you some stats about those, sort of a brief summary. You can search for the project if you want. And here we got U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and you can see it's part of the group U.S. Department of Interior. You can also browse by project groups. And here we can see the Atlantic Offshore Wind Assessment is one of the groups. There's currently only a single project because this is just started. I didn't mean to click on it, but here we go. This is this is the profile page for that project group. So this would be sort of that executive summary that you would see for all of the projects involved with the Atlantic Offshore Wind Assessment. And it gives you this executive summary at the top, as well as this attractive map with all the tracks in it. But obviously there's not very much to show right now because there's only a single project with a couple of tags deployed. So I'm going to go back, and actually I'm going to show you a different example because of a different group, because there'll be more data to look at in that group. So let me go back. So here's the project list again, and we can browse. We can either click on the link here, or we can browse by project groups, and that gives us the overall summary of that group. So let's click on U.S. Department of Interior. That's going to be more relevant. It's more similar to the work that the profile that you'll be seeing with the Atlantic Offshore Wind Assessment. And so here we have the group summary with all the tracks, and it's a kind of a big mess of tracks everywhere. But it's just showing you all the data at once that's available. And you can refine that again. So here we have that timeline tool, but this time it's showing you when the detections are occurring as well. So it sort of helps you refine that selection that you're making. So here I'm interested in, say, this spike of data right there, and that sort of shows you all the tracks from that time. You'll notice that the colors on the tracks are going to be different. So if you click on this map legend, this sort of shows you what those colors mean. And the tracks are actually colored by project here. So these are projects within the U.S. Department of Interior, but black is visiting. And what that means is essentially you're going to be detecting transmitters for projects that are within this group, but also transmitters outside that group. And that gives you a sense of how much you're contributing to other projects outside of your interest. And I think that's important to quantify as well. So here we can toggle the visibility of these different tracks. So if we remove all the visiting tracks, now we're only seeing tracks from tags that were deployed within a project of this project group. That makes sense. There's a lot of different organization here, so it's hard to keep track of things sometimes, but the main idea is here that you're trying to see what's, if you want to see only the data within your group, then this is what it looks like. And likewise, we have stations that were deployed within that group, and then the stations that were deployed outside that group that are both active and inactive. These profile pages are very similar to each other, but so there's going to be a profile page for a single station, the profile page for individual animals as well, and they'll have similar visualizations, but obviously show slightly different things depending on the type of data. So for this one here, we have this executive summary data, but you can also drill in further to more info. And this gives you the latest activity in that group. So we're planning on fleshing this out a little more, providing more latest activity things like what was the last detection in this group or whatever. But for now, it says when was the last station deployed in the group and when was the last tag deployed in that group. It also tells you the sort of another set of metrics and then affiliations, such as the principal investigator for that project. And we just move on to these tabs here. So we have a list of all the projects that are within that. So sorry, let's close this timeline. So here are all the projects that have stations. There's 17 in total, and it lists all of them here. You can click on the links to view those project profiles. These are all, and if you go on this drop down here, you can see all the projects with tag deployments. The next tab is the same idea, but for the animals. So there's a total of 100 species, and you can see the summary of that. These colors are, again, the projects that have deployed that species. You can expand that to view the individuals of that species that were tagged. So if you click on this link, it goes to that species profile. Click on this link, it goes to the individual animal profile. You can also view a list of all the animals detected if you want. Next tab is the summary of the detections within this project group. So clearly there's going to be, because there's like 3,000, sorry, close this here. We have, 2,600 animals detected. It's going to be a lot of detections over time. And here we are with the whole timeline of all the detections. So this tool here colors the detections by the number of animals detected on this individual day. And you can sort of navigate through it by clicking through this bottom graph here. And this is a helpful way to sort of narrow down the selection that you're making. You can click on individual, you can also zoom in here, drag around there, but you can click on one of these data bars and it tells you exactly what was detected on that date. And the plan is to add a table on here as well, the option to view a table rather than this plot. When you're narrowing down a selection, it would instead show you a table of all those detections. You can also view the detections by hour of day. So again, you can see that this is splits it up. So this needs to be reformatted so that the legend isn't overlapping clearly, but you get the idea that here we have a radial plot of detections by hour of day for all projects combined. And here again, for month of year. And it makes sense it's happening mostly during the migratory period. And same idea, you can hover over it, gives you a summary of it, and you can click on one of these bars and gives you a list of all the animals detected for that data point. And last but not least, we have stations. And stations are, as you imagine, all the stations within that project group. And the colors here of the project that's associated with. And clicking on this plus button gives you a timeline for that station. So here's my station with detections. Here's a station of detections, and it's the same kind of timeline as before, but this is for that individual station. So let's narrow down and see what time it is. Okay. Just quickly, we'll show you a profile for an individual animal. So here's all the animals detected within this project group. And I'm going to select the animal with the most stations visited because it's going to be the longest track that looks the nicest. And so I can click on the deployment ID here. it's going to bring me to that animal. So that's not a common nighthawk, these are just randomly generated pictures. So keep that in mind. And here you can see that the executive summary has changed. So we see that it's telling you now the number of stations it's been to, number of projects that's contributed to the data that's been collected on that bird, how many countries it's visited, how many individual detections there were. So mind you, these are actual departure and arrival events right now, but we're going to change that number to actually reflect the number of detections. And then we'll have, we have these links, which we're going to likely move into this more info section down below. So remember the product groups section had this more info as well, but here we have different information to provide, such as different affiliations. We have different metrics that we're going to include, such as the measurements of the animals and age and sex and whatnot. And then we can have links to iNaturalist, relevant conservation information. And here we have a track of that individual, and it looks a little cleaner because it's all, it's not a whole bunch of tracks overlaying each other. And we can animate that track if we choose to as well. So here we can select, currently it's selecting the whole deployment period, but we can select when the detections are occurring. And it will animate through all of those detections. And last but not least, we can look at a station profile. So let's go to the stations that this animal has been detected at, and let's find one that has a bunch of animals at it. Let's click this one here. And here we have an executive summary for a station. So here, a photo of your station, the status of that station, that it's active. Sorry about that. Let's open that again. And then we have the current executive summary of the detections. And here, the latest activity, the latest tag detected, and the latest configuration for that station. You can also load the antenna configuration. But this would be information that we could grab directly for the live status updates of your station and get a sense of whether your station is working or not and what it's been detecting. So I'm going to move on to the static reporting tool because we're just running out of time here. So I'll just quickly go over this static reporting tool. We've decided that combining the static reports with this side would be a bit complex. Because I think there's some different needs for those, and I think there's going to be some customization needed for reporting with static reports. So if we go to this other tab here, and here this reporting tool is sort of built using the same kind of tools, but it's slightly different how you navigate it. So here we're going to be finding detections by stations. And then we can select a station through this drop down, or we can select stations on the map. So here, if I want to make a summary for my station prospect, I can click that on the map. And here I'll give you a quick summary of what was detected there. So I've selected one station for one project, and there's 58 animals of 12 species from 17 projects that were detected there. So I want to refine those selections. So if I want to, I don't want to show all of these. I can click on one of these and select, I only represent certain species on this. And then I can format the report to years separately if I want. I can split years into quarters. I can also choose to report only the latest period, so like the latest quarter or the latest year. And then clicking on the create the report, here we have all these pages that are generated for the report, and then you can print it from there. Right now, the report isn't complete, so the information within the report isn't going to look like what you've been provided for examples, because this is still a work in progress. But the main point here is sort of the process behind building the report being different from the Dynamic Explorer tool. And with that, I think I should probably end there to leave time for questions and discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. I think the only before this meeting, individuals we shared examples of static reports, and those are examples that report tool could produce.
Exactly.
But we wanted to walk through the process, and then those are just some examples so that we can kind of try and get it right. But because of the density of the data, as you might imagine, creating static reports that show everything that's going on is quite a challenge. So that's why we want to get it right. So I'll mute my Christmas songs in the back.
Thanks, Stu and Luke. That was amazing to see kind of where you guys are at with the Motus database development and the reporting tools. It looks like we have one question in the chat from Holly asking, at what stage of the processing are these data, if they're raw or filtered? And then is there a way to provide an indicator of kind of quality and confidence via some kind of filtering?
Yeah, we do filter those data in the public tools. So as Stu mentioned in the beginning, there's data available through the R package, which are basically the unfiltered data. So there's some false positives in that, but when we were presenting our data on the public website, we want that to have as little false positives as possible to, not produce confusing results. So we filter those data, and we do provide information on how those data are filtered. We don't have an exact, quality indicator, but it's more just the methods behind the filtering that we provide.
Thanks, Luke. Holly, did you have any follow-ups? It looks like sounds good. Any other questions? Folks can feel free to raise a hand, put them in the chat. I have a couple, maybe to kind of prime the pump. So I had a question. I don't know if this is a Stu question or a Luke question, but if there was interest in different Motus users to combine data across projects, so say 3 different groups all tagged bats and they wanted to do kind of a combined analysis of those bat data, is there a way currently in the portal that's under development to allow tags for multiple projects to be put into a report, or is it mostly based on stations at this point?
Yeah, so the way it's structured is very modular. So anything like that is easy to do. So you could, for instance, select a species or species group and then filter by project, for instance, in that case. And so select just the 3 projects that you're interested in, maybe the date range for the data that you want, and then click create report, and that would do it for you. The filtering I've done is there to sort of be able to select any kind of data in any way. In that's hopefully, at least. That's the idea.
Yeah, and as we move farther along, theoretically, you could do the same for species. So show me all silver-haired bats or whatever. That will only provide you like sort of the summary level data. If groups wanted to do a meta-analysis, that would require more collaboration to get access to the full data suite. And then the R package is designed in such a way to allow access across multiple projects to the PI or whoever would be doing the actual analysis. So there's a little bit of a disconnect between what we're seeing here and what would have to happen for a more detailed analysis. That's kind of a separate access to the data process through the R package.
That's a good point, Stu. So I can envision a workflow where groups would use the database to identify potential data sets that could be combined for a meta-analysis. And then the next step would be going through the R package to access the data for a more detailed analysis.
Yeah, it's either grabbing all the data that's already open, or contacting all of the groups that you want the data from and sort of forging the collaboration that way. But from our perspective, we're providing, as you say, that first cut. This is what we have, and this is where it is, and then it's on the collaborators to take it to the next step from there.
That's fantastic. We have a question from Lucy about portal availability for use in Europe. They're hoping to also set up offshore wind related projects in Europe.
Yeah, so all the tools you see are they will be available for everybody, for anybody who has a station or a tag, everything that Luke showed you. The only thing that is currently customized is the concept of groups, which we haven't yet made it so that you can make your own group. You can group different projects together and do what you want that way, but the actual kind of administrative side of joining either the Department of Interior group or the offshore wind group, that's a custom thing that we'd have to create. So if different groups think that that's something they would want to do, they can contact us for now and we'll sort of flush out those details later. Allowing individuals to make custom groups can get a bit messy because people will just, you know what I mean? There'll be groups all over the place, and most of that information can be done in more custom reporting tools as opposed to a formal group that everybody works and collaborates under.
And then I'll just add that having kind of that European perspective on what a really helpful format for these different types of reports, both site-specific and regional, could look like for offshore wind would be really helpful. So there'll be opportunities in a little bit to provide some initial feedback during our breakout groups, but we definitely welcome any feedback that folks may have following the workshop, and there'll be another opportunity to weigh in on the products as they're a little bit further along in development this spring. It looks like we have another question about if we deploy a receiver but do not tag any animals, all of our tracks for the projects will be visitors. If we add that project to a group such as the Atlantic Wind Group, will animals tagged in this group show up as visitors or as part of the project? So that's kind of a format question.
Yeah, and it's also, sorry, Luke, if you want to go ahead, it's related. Caleb asked another question that's it's kind of the same thing. You can go ahead, Luke, if you had an answer to that first one there.
Yeah, the first one, it's more like the resolution at which you're looking at it. So if you're looking at that project group, then it's going to include all the projects, sum all of them together. So basically, your group, your project, and everyone else's project, all their stations and all their tag deployments are going to group together. So even if your project doesn't have any tags deployed in it, if you get tags visiting your station that are from a project within that project group, those won't be considered visitors. Only visitors are ones from outside the project group. But if you're looking at your project alone, or if you're looking at that station alone, then they would be considered visitors, because it's not summing together all the tags and stations from that groups anymore. Does that make sense? And then,
yeah, Caleb's
so Caleb goes, it's sort of like what Stu was saying. So the process behind it, we haven't really developed a process, but I think its plan is to work on a management tool that will allow you to do that. But for now, we're doing it as there's need. So we anticipate this being a large number of projects involved with the Atlantic offshore wind assessment. So we created this group in that anticipation, but there isn't really a placeholder for that quite yet. But if you think that you'd like to create a group because it'd be helpful to join many projects together, then do get in touch and we can discuss that.
Yeah, we haven't quite flushed that out yet. And I think we can probably provide instructions within the guideline documents that are happening alongside this, or within Motus instructions, because the concept of groups is meant to be an administrative one. Don't want people to group things together because they want to see the data that way. It's meant as a collaboration tool to visualize and share information about all the projects, not to summarize data. And there's other ways to do that.
And just one quick note, which I forgot to mention in the presentation, is that as you're filtering data, as you're navigating to different pages, all of that's being recorded in the URL of the web page. So if, for instance, you wanted to view multiple projects together, you can select all those projects and then view a profile for 4 projects at once. And then copy that URL, and just every time you visit the page, it'll update the data. So it's as if you're in a project group. It just doesn't have the fancy header. But if you understand what I'm saying.
Those are really good questions. If other folks have questions or comments too, now it's a good time. We have a few more minutes. If I don't see any come through, I might ask one of the ones that I wrote down during the presentation. I did have a question about the animations, and I understand this is like an aesthetics question, but when Stu showed the thrushes on his slide, it had those, is that from that move
This.
I guess,
Yeah.
yeah. Any thoughts on potentially having the animations look like that, or do you think you'll stick with the tracks format?
Yeah, so that's more of a programmatic thing that we will be addressing with like we're going to consult a designer to really clean up everything at the end. One of the advantages of using what I'm using is that it makes things a little more interactive. So you could click on the points and hover over them and get information about those points, whereas the move this stuff, these are more static images that are animated. And so there's caveats to that, but there's other more complex programming that we could look into. I'm just not sure if it's appropriate to use in this place. So we'll see. And it's going to look prettier than it is, that's for sure. It's just, we'd have to clean things up for the animations. But yeah. And I see that Holly has a question about the static reports. So Holly's question is regarding whether it's possible to create detection reports for the static ones that I showed at the end there, where you have a single season over multiple years. And if there's going to be species groupings within that. So like endangered species or something like that. So again, that's actually a design aspect that that's good feedback for us, because I hadn't, we can include that. I hadn't considered it as being that necessary, but I think that's an easy feature to include. So for sure we can do that. And species groupings like endangered is definitely something that we had in mind. So yeah. Stu, do you want to address Timothy's?
And maybe Tim's question, and then it looks like Alexandra has a question too, and then we'll probably have to pause there so that we have enough time for the break and then transitioning to the breakout groups. So I'll let you guys take those two questions.
Yeah, the data embargo concept. This is one of these good opportunity for feedback we want to get from groups like this, but also from all collaborators, as we want all Motus data to be as open as possible, as quickly as possible, but stop short of just requiring that from the get-go. So the concept of the embargo would be for a period of 3 to 5 years, all data isn't available, but that after that point, it would become available for anybody who wants to download it. And that all of the data that is on the website is public no matter what. There's no way to escape that. What we're just talking about is the raw data that you would need to do more detailed analysis that's available through the R package. And it's a decision that we haven't struck formally yet. It's going to be involved in the new, so we'd welcome any feedback now as to what would be an appropriate way to go at, or an appropriate time window to make it open. So right now we're playing with that 3-year time frame. I think that covers that.
Thanks. And then Alexandra, if you want to unmute, feel free to ask your question. And then it looks like we have a great comment too from Mackenzie in the chat that we'll capture in the notes as a possible next step.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions, and I think one of these is already answered, but I'm just thinking from like a wind energy data analysis standpoint. Often biologists are analyzing data as fatalities of birds, fatalities of bats, fatalities of raptors considered separate as birds. And I think this was already asked already, but is there a possibility of having these really super broad groups like bats versus birds for people wanting a really quick look at the data? And then my second question is, in the summary reports, I wonder, and this is maybe more of a comment and also a question to see if this is something you've considered already. But I wonder if it would be beneficial to have some sort of data, like broad summary information about runtime of the receivers. I'm just thinking if I was a biologist looking to see, like maybe compare relative between two stations that are based near a turbine, and I want to see where more birds or bats are coming through. If I get the total count of tags, that's great. But if one receiver is not running as often, maybe it has less sun access to a solar panel or something like this, then the levels might not be equivalent. So I'm curious if you've thought of that. I think that's kind of challenging to do given the complications, but curious if you had thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I think that's definitely one of the things that we're thinking of including is some kind of receiver activity metric. So not only like what it's been detecting, but how long it's been active for. And so you can measure that by on some stations, individual radio pulses from the noise background, but also you can use GPS. So we already have that, collect those data, and we're planning on parsing that out to produce some kind of metric like that. And so I anticipate putting that in like in further info metrics section of a station, for instance. But that the station timeline that I was showing, and I forgot to mention this, but thanks for the comment, is when you click on expand the rows for a station, you can see a timeline of that station, what detections have been occurring, but also when it's been active. And so that would give you a brief overview of, you know, what the detectability of the station. And then when you're saying about the species groups, like those larger groups and separating them out and looking at it separately, we do have them like as filter options. I haven't really gone through into depth like how we're going to figure out like coloring things differently, but I do think that's going to be a valuable thing to change, not just by looking at them by project, right? You're going to want to look at things like those larger groups. So I think it's a good point, and yeah, we'll for sure keep that in mind when we're working on that side of things.
Yeah, those are great questions and comments.
Another, just one quick aspect of the reporting tool that Luke didn't show, just because as you can imagine, it's so dense, we didn't have a chance to show everything, but likewise, the Explore Data tool is also summarize data by country, state, province, and we'll be breaking that down further, like by BCR, for example, bird conservation region, as well as the custom polygons that you can create. So that's just a path that we're on that will be available. Not exactly sure how narrow we're willing to go. I don't know if we'll go down to county. That's a little bit intense, but we'll stop at state or province for now.
Thanks, Stu. And just so we can stay on track with the agenda, I just want to thank everybody for the really good questions and comments. We've captured them in the notes as well as in the chat. It's all super helpful. And at this point, we're going to transition over to a short break. And Luke will be putting, I believe, a link to the portal in the chat so that folks can explore the portal during the break and have it kind of fresh on the brain for the breakout groups. So we'll reconvene at 2:10 Eastern, so in 15 minutes. And at that point, Kate Williams will put everybody into breakout groups. So Luke, if you have anything to say about the link, I'll turn it over.
So I just sent you the link. Just keep in mind, it might take a few moments to load the first way around as it loads in all the data, but it should work a little smoother if you've clicked around for a little bit.
Excellent. Thanks, Luke. And enjoy the break, everybody. And we'll see you back here at 2:10 Eastern. All right, so it's 2:10 now. Hopefully folks are coming back from the break. Give it just another moment here. All right, so let me just switch my slide here. So the next part of the meeting, we'll be having breakout groups. And the goal of the breakout groups is to get feedback on the automated reports for the Offshore Motus portal. And we're specifically looking for feedback on the site-specific reports that were emailed out in advance of the meeting, and for developing regional reports across stations and projects using some of the components of the Explorer tool that Luke shared. When we reconvene, instead of each group reporting out, we're just going to open up the discussion to the full group and ask what key feedback came out of the small group discussions, and if there are any other ideas that people want to mention before we wrap up. So Kate Williams is going to randomly assign folks into breakout groups, and each group will be facilitated by one of our project co-leads. So with that, I'll turn things over to Kate to start assigning people into groups.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. Ed Jenkins of BRI is actually the official meeting host now. So if you have any issues when we split up into breakout groups, hopefully he will be able to help. And we should have at least one project collaborator in each of the breakout groups who will be sort of helping facilitate the conversation and take notes. So I am going to open up the breakout groups now. And you'll have to sort of accept the invitation to move into your breakout room. And I think the goal is to talk for about half an hour, right, Pam, before we come back together?
Yeah, that's correct. Typically the breakout groups tend to fly by with discussion, so hopefully that'll be the case. And we'll reconvene at 2:40.
Okay, sounds good. All right, and it looks like we might have a few people who haven't come back from the break yet, and so haven't accepted the invitation to move into the group. So they may, come back sometime in the next few minutes and distribute themselves. I'm probably gonna just go join one of the groups and help take notes if you're up for staying in this main room and helping anyone who comes back to this the main group to just assign them to a breakout room.
Yep, that sounds good. I'm trying to load that message to broadcast and it's just loading a few words. Maybe it's too long, so I might have to do it.
Oh, really? That's weird. Yeah, maybe there's a length limit on it.
I think so, yeah.
Or because there's multiple lines, maybe it needs to not have like line breaks in it.
Yeah, it's only going halfway through the first point of the three.
Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe a couple of separate ones. I mean, everyone's got the link to the Explorer data portal at this point.
Yeah.
Because we just got that. So, and everyone should have the hard copies from the email last week. So it's probably not that big a deal.
Okay.
Okay, I don't know if I can distribute myself to a breakout room. Oh, I can. All right, sounds good. You feel free to message me on Slack or anything if anything comes up.
Will do. Yep.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
We were able to send out some of the preliminary static reports in the email, but more documentation will be presented to generate the static reports. Is there something that you would like look for in a static report, or something that you want in a static report moving forward?
No, I think that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't supposed to be able to access it. So, and I apologize for my voice. I have a cold, but but I do have some other feedback that I was interested in, which I might just try to share my screen just so that I can, if that's helpful, just so I can explain what I'm trying to say. Hopefully, I'm picking the right screen here. But so I went in and I just tried going around. I assume you can see that, right?
Hold on here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Okay. So I tried doing, one thing I was just interested in was, I understand that you can select the stations, right? But one thing I'm wondering, and I know that they're interpolated tracks, but I would imagine that it would be useful, if possible, would be to select only tracks. Oops, sorry, that's not what I wanted to. Yeah.
So having the
basically like
having the ability to select like individual tags and then seeing their tracks over time.
Well, all I meant to say was, like, if I wanted to try and pick, let's just say there was a planning area here, for example, right? If I wanted to pick only that planning area, but there were no stations, obviously, that were covering it, right?
Sure.
Like, how is it possible? Is it possible to select just the tracks that then lead to whichever stations provide, information? Does that make sense?
So you want to know, like, given a selection of tracks, what their last detection was?
Yeah, or last detection, or really just be able to get so like if you click on a station, you can generate a summarize these stations, right? But you can't do that if you just pick the tracks. Oops, sorry, how do I go back? So if my point is just like, can you just generate a summary? Sorry. Well, anyway, I guess you kind of get the idea here. So if I just click on these tracks. Oh, does it actually? Yeah, see, it doesn't summarize the stations. You see what I'm trying to say?
So
Okay.
Can you just hover over that square you made? Like, get rid of the pop-up. Just stay hovered over for a second. Because I thought I saw, see, now hover over the actual tracks that are in that. I could have sworn I saw it start to sound like there was a little pop-up that said like 9 something when you drew that square. So go ahead and draw it.
Oh, here, like when you hover over.
Right, yeah. Now, if you're drawing the square, does it try and draw one again? It might just be a bit. Oh, see, it started doing it. You're right. So I see what you're trying to do. Like, you just want to know. Okay, I want to know everything that crossed over that, like all those tracks. Who do they belong to, and summarize that information.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. The thing that worries me a little bit about that is obviously they're all interpolated tracks, so we don't know for sure that those animals are moving through that area. But you're right, Holly. It seems like something that would be. It's information that people would definitely want for a given area to try to understand at least what animals might have moved through, like a geographic area of interest.
Right, and because even there, otherwise I would have to pick like this whole area. And it would involve all of those stations, even though I really want to focus on the stations that had the detections.
Right. If you hover over those individual tracks without like marking a given geographic area, click to view.
Oops. I just oh, you know what? I deleted them. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. All right. How do I undelete them? Sorry.
Right. So you could click on the track and see individual track level information, but that would be kind of laborious if you were trying to get like all the tracks through a wind energy area.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So sorry here. So right. So you're saying like click here and then oops, click to view. Wait, why am I not? Oh, it's not letting me click.
Maybe that doesn't work yet.
Yeah, maybe that doesn't work yet, but I see what you're saying. Like, yeah, to do this for each one of them, it just, if you have a lot of them crossing over, it would take a long time. That's it. That's all. As long as you guys understand what I was trying to say.
Yeah, makes
sharing.
sense.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a really good point.
Is there a way to get better accuracy on some of those locations? Like we've been doing some tests and trials of detection, on some of the antennas that we're using in the receiving stations that we've got out. So is there a way to like share that information with you guys so that you can get, you know, like a better handle on what time and where any of our detections you know, are there or something, so that we can just generally improve. Like we're saying, it's all interpolated, but once we get more of these systems out offshore, you know, can we get better spatial resolution, and then consequently potentially get better, you know, like it would be nice to be able to see if we get a good network as we're adding these things in, understand a little bit better what the sort of other conditions are around those detections as well, right? So if we know that we're, I don't know.
So as this kind of as a side, you know, deliverable to, or one of the other side deliverables to this project is kind of getting some of that better spatial resolution tracking available, particularly for the Block Island stations, because they have a nice triangulation set up right now. And the general idea for at least our tracking algorithm or other collaborators who have their own tracking algorithm is to perhaps provide those through the R package, as opposed to providing them like more on the publicly facing tool, so that, you know, if you want to use a particular data analysis tool, for example, to get better spatial resolution on the tracks, then, you know, we can provide that to the end users, so to speak.
Okay.
And then the other piece that I think you mentioned, Julia, is that calibration data. So you know sort of the detection coverage for a given station. And we have been talking about how to try to set up something through Motus so that people can upload those calibration results, so that you can see, and because right now if you go into Motus, it's sort of like a idealized detection coverage map often. I mean, it'll show the number of antennas pointing in different directions basically, but there's no like empirical field data in terms of detection range at given flight heights and that kind of thing. And there isn't currently a way in the Motus sort of website, like there isn't a way to upload that information right now, but it would be really good information to be able to include like with tracks as part of like the public data set. Yeah. So it is something we have been talking about. People haven't been doing a lot of that calibration yet, but we're hoping people will really start doing it a lot more. And then we need to have a way to make those data public along with the actual detections.
Yeah, so you could, so when you have the points of the receiving stations, you know, if it has a little sort of pop-up thing that says what type of antenna it is, which obviously makes a huge difference, and then what any calibration studies have been done there, none or some, or, you know, I think that would be good. And the other thing I was wondering is, you know, when Holly was pointing out those tracks, it's like it would be great to know, like if they've gone from point A to point B, what that average speed was or something, so you could maybe work out if it left there at one time and then got to its next point at another time, then what's a sort of average flight speed. Then you could sort of try and work out what else was going on during that movement. That's great though. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, I like that, Julia, as well, because that kind of gives you a sense of, could they have taken a roundabout route, right, to get to that destination to some extent?
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I'm getting dazzled by the sun. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose you could also couple that with, I mean, I'll have to talk to the Motus team, but you could couple that with weather data as well, because you'll have headwind or tailwind effects in terms of indicated ground speed. So, you know, that could assist in that analysis and not be too big of a load to kind of add on over that, you know, time span in question.
So the other thing we were thinking about doing, Kate, you might like this, is sticking a tag on one of our, you know, one of the APEM flights and seeing how accurate the flight heights are as well. So you're seeing what our detection from the Z is, as well as, you know, normally it's in by boat, which is nice and easy, and you sort of do ever decreasing circles. But I guess people are also doing drones and things like that, which would also, that would be just really fascinating information for each station.
some of my graduate work this semester has been utilizing both drones as well as small aviation aircraft to do some of that constraining of the Z altitude on the Block Island stations, in particular being from Rhode Island. So there is work being done on that, you know, at least trying to standardize the techniques that we recommend to people in terms of calibrating their stations, not only kind of in an XY plane, but also in that vertical plane as well.
Right, because as you said, Julia, I mean, it's so important to get that height data and understand the coverage at different altitudes. So yeah, Eric was doing like Civil Air Patrol flights and trying to, with tags, trying to get some of that information. Where possible, I think it seems like a drone is a better option, but there are some limitations in terms of Department of the Interior usage of drones at the moment. So Eric had to get creative.
So will that be in the report? We'll be able to, is there a way to see what you did?
Yeah, Eric, that is part of the like calibration instructions that you're working on, right?
Yeah, so as part of the broader NYSERDA grant, we're providing both the guidance document to provide recommendations in terms of how to calibrate the stations and what was effective and what wasn't effective. And kind of some introduction on how that calibration can be used for finer scale tracking. But more on the Motus end, we're hoping that the web log, develops, hey, these are calibration tags, these are actual animal tags, and some of that data will be able to provide, more information on the calibrated status of each kind of station. Kate.
Oops.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
This is Ruth. So yeah, this is a really, really nice tool. I just had a couple of questions. So I did click on one station that was just offshore of Virginia Beach, and nothing came up, when I clicked on it to get the the summary report or whatever. And I was just, and then everything else I clicked on, I did get the information, and I was just wondering what that means. And it did say it was active. So is that, what does that indicate if like nothing comes up?
I mean, without having it explicitly in front of me, it could mean that there's no metadata provided by the deployer, for example. Or it could be a bug in retrieving the data from the database. So, if you send us that, or if you want to put it in the chat and I can just kind of write down the station, then, we can send it to Lucas and we can kind of see what's up with that station and maybe provide, better information to the user. Hey, there's no metadata here, or, provide some better bug handling to, make sure that people don't get basically nothing when they click on a station.
I feel like it has something to do with the demo right now. I think it's Lucas's demo, because I clicked on a few stations and you get a blank page.
Oh, okay.
Individual station. I was just going to go back to the Motus receiver map and see if I imagine the metadata will come up there, which would just suggest that he hasn't linked it up yet.
Yeah, I mean, all the stations have metadata. So if it's not showing up, I think that there are enough people on it right now. It might be a little slow uploading some stuff too, but it should all be there. I'm not seeing any stations off of Virginia Beach that I'm not, if I hover over it, I'm getting some kind of metadata on all of them.
Yeah, me too.
So yeah, it just comes up blank still. I wrote down the name of it. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah, and then the other, I'm sorry, what was that?
I had the exact same issue with those two stations, the CVAL ones.
Really? So when you hover over those CVAL sites, you're not seeing anything? Because I can see both of them right now. Huh, okay.
If you hover it, so when I hover, I get CVAO1 and I get one animal, one species. But if I click on it, then it comes up with a blank page.
Right, exactly. That's what I get too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
that's just,
okay.
I don't think Lucas is linked. I don't think they've been hooked up yet, because I haven't
Okay.
clicked on one and it actually showed anything yet, so.
Okay, okay. Yeah, mine is CV underscore A02. So it's like right
It's
close.
the same for both of those. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
did
Okay.
just, I did just click on one up in Canada and it did come up with a map showing some of the detections from there. So I think it's probably got something to do with what data is actually present at that station. So a good thing to bring up to them for sure.
Yeah. And then I actually had one other question. So let's see, I can remember. So when you click on a station, you get the report, you look at, everything, and then where it says switch station or switch to new stations or whatever it says. So that just brings up the list of stations within that group, right? Because they're all sort of truncated lists. And then, which makes sense. The only, it's just switch station is what it is. So when you click on it, then it comes up with a list of different stations that I assume are under the same work group. But what would be kind of nice is other than like clicking on the left arrow, in the, on the actual page itself,
Sure.
To get back to the map of stations, then you have to, zoom out again. Would there be any way to make it easier so you just get back to that original map again at the same level of zoom that you were at when you were kind of clicking around initially? Or am I asking for too much?
No, it seemed from the small bit of web development I have, I think it's possible, keeping the level of zoom when returning back to something that you've been previously working on. So I can bring that up to Lucas and see if that's something he can incorporate.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And you're saying you want it for like all stations in a geographic area, not just the stations as part of that project group, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, for those who have kind of seen the static and the dynamic reports, are you satisfied with just having dynamic reports, or is having it, paper or as a PDF rather, something that you would be interested in? We're just trying to figure out manpower in terms of standardizing like some of the written reports.
I would like to have static reports, I think, just in terms of, being able to more easily take information that has been pre-processed rather than having to interpret it, I guess offer a somewhat subjective interpretation of my own, right?
Yeah.
So I think it would be really useful having static reports personally.
Okay.
And Holly, there were two versions that we sent out. There's like the HTML version, but then you're talking about like a PDF, right? Like when Luke was going through, like you sort of set your filters and then generate a PDF report.
Yeah, yeah. So I looked at the ones that were sent out just now. I guess I'm not sure which one I like better between the interactive version and the PDF, but I think ultimately, yes, I would want a PDF. I'm trying to get back to the one that was interactive. Oh, here we go. And I guess the nice thing about the interactive one is, you can click on each of the tracks. Yeah, I guess, I don't know, I would probably ask for both if possible. But, I always like to ask for more.
No, I mean, that's helpful. We're just trying to figure out you know, if people aren't going to use the PDF versions, then like we're not going to put a lot of effort into developing them further. If they're having some, you know, an automated reporting for that summary level data, if that's useful for people, then, you know, Motus is going to want to provide that. We're thinking like, you know, if there are, I don't know, quarterly reporting requirements or something where you could just like quickly filter it up, put together a PDF and download it, you know, it might be able to meet some reporting requirements, for example.
I see what you're saying. I mean, if you can put all the information that's in the PDF in the interactive version, then I don't think you could always just turn it into a PDF yourself, right? I mean, that's, so the difference, what I'm looking at right here, I mean, I could share my screen again. But the PDF version has, that you guys sent out in that email, it has a bunch of tables and plots. It has like the timeline and the hour a day. And then whereas the interactive one, the Merlin one, has basically just the tracks and a list. But I would think that you could put all of whatever's in the PDF in the interactive one, and then somebody could just print that out as a PDF, right? So yeah, I don't think you necessarily need to have a separate PDF as long as you can take the interactive version and convert it into a PDF. Does that make sense? And if you want me to share my screen, I can do that. Okay, great.
Now, were there anything for everybody? Was there anything like any aesthetic choices that made it hard to understand, or where you couldn't understand what the graph was trying to present, or anything along those lines that anybody saw during playing around with the portal in general?
I did notice when I clicked on view more info, it came up in a different language.
Okay. Okay, guess there's
English,
still some
please.
bugs in there. All right.
Good to know. And then I think, Eric, we only have a few minutes left, right?
I think so, yes.
So it might be good to talk about data sharing just for the last few minutes.
Sure, you want
We'll tee it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Stu touched on this in the main session, but I think the hope is that when people join the Motus network, that they will share all of their data publicly, not just the summary level data, but the raw data, because that brings the most value to everyone else in the network, right? And it sort of allows it to build on itself. But there may be circumstances where specific projects are not comfortable sharing their raw data immediately and want to only share summary level data for some period of time. And so Stu is throwing out a 3-year embargo period for that, and essentially enforcing transparency of the raw data after that 3-year period if someone didn't select having those data be open from the beginning. And as Stu mentioned, they're in the process of sort of reassessing the data sharing policy, and so it'd be very helpful to get feedback from you all on what sort of process feels like it would make sense in terms of when you require raw data to be made public. If you do, how long an embargo period makes sense. If there are, tools like some of the Motus tools we've talked about, you have a lot more things you can do with them if some data are public. If we could make certain data tools accessible for publicly available data, that might help incentivize data sharing. So I think we're just interested in people's thoughts as the Motus network sort of wrestling with what new strategy to use for this.
So, Kate, I was thinking about this when it was introduced, but from my astronomy background, anything that was public on the publicly funded antenna that we would use would have a 2-year embargo, and then would be made publicly available. But that was because it was publicly funded research. So perhaps, you know, some of the DOI stuff could be made more, you know, rapidly public, while, you know, there would be a longer embargo on some of the more privately funded endeavors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the problem is that we're trying to encourage developers to get these things out, right? So they, in order to do that, they've got to be comfortable with what they're signing up for. And if they feel a bit concerned, would it not be better to have at least limited data for a longer period of time than no data at all? Well, you know what I mean? I don't know whether it could be a sliding scale depending on the type of, like you say, like the type of funding or whatever.
Right. I mean, the summary data has to be public. There's no option there.
Yeah.
So you're feeling like the raw data, there would be some concerns from offshore wind developers about sharing that immediately?
I don't know. I mean, we've not encountered that, right? I mean, those 2 Dominion ones, they seem really cool about it. And having said that, except for the test tag data on those 2 turbines, it's mostly 58 service. It's mostly, we've had like 6 or 7 Nighthawks. I think that was it, common Nighthawks of those ones. I don't know. I just think maybe be a bit sensitive to it.
Mm-hmm. I know we've only got like 30 seconds left. Does anyone else want to talk about data transparency?
I guess my one thought there would just be in terms of the data filtering, as long as it's, I would be wary about it being raw. I mean, as long as it's filtered to some extent. Okay.
You're right, Pam, that was speedy.
Thanks. Yeah, I know. Once we get going, it usually flies right by. Thanks everybody for participating in those breakout groups. I know in my group, we got some just really, really helpful information that was awesome to capture in the notes. So the goal for this reconvene session is to just mention some highlights that came out of each group. So I'm happy to kind of open it up if folks want to speak up, raise their hand, or put anything in the chat that we can raise with the broader group. And if it's like radio silence, then I'll start running through my list. So I'll just give it a few moments for folks to chime in ahead of me, hopefully.
So our group, we had a couple of bugs that kind of came up, and it's probably because it's still under development and not accessible to the whole Motus database right now. I leave Lucas to comment on that. But so I can pass those along to him as the developer. But one of, two of the comments that we had was perhaps incorporating like kind of some average, I guess, animal statistics or animal movement patterns. So like the average speed of the animal over the course of, going from point A to point B, to just kind of see on a broader scale, did the animal take time to meander between 2 points as opposed to this more direct track, which is currently being shown on the data. The other kind of important bit that we touched on was kind of this idea of data visibility and access to the raw data moving forward. And the 2 things that kind of came out of that was almost generating a sliding scale for data. So perhaps publicly funded data by DOI or other public US entities could be made more rapidly available. Have a period of embargo for the PIs to produce their papers, but then be made available more rapidly than, say, some of the more privately funded endeavors or some of the turbine developers, for example, who might want to have more time to review their data. So perhaps instead of setting on 1 year length for an embargo, perhaps having a sliding scale depending on the funding for each project.
Those are really good suggestions. Thanks, Eric. Do other groups want to kind of add to that or have anything new?
Yeah, I'm happy to sort of add some of our discussion. We spent a bit talking about what people are trying to use this for and how we can use these reporting tools to help standardize the knowledge that we have kind of in the community. And one thing that sort of is interesting that came out of that, I mean, we'll have some specific suggestions that come from this, but trying to standardize the process in which we glean information from Motus stations and incorporate it, let's say, into if you're interested in incorporating Motus data into an offshore wind siting tool or siting decision or something like that. How you can do that in a very standardized way, such that people are being consistent, and so developing more or less a standard operating procedure for how you want to go about using the tool to do that. So not about the tool specifically, but how you can, the tool itself is very flexible, but how you can develop a very clear protocol for using it to answer kind of specific questions that might arise, so that we kind of get consistent results back, because it can be sometimes, depending on the different search criteria that you use or how you went about searching for various things, you can end up with answers that are different among different queries potentially, without the user trying to do that, right? Without just the user just making different sorts of decisions along the way. So we talked about that, and we also talked a lot about how we wanted to make sure that translating the effort data and having really consistent understanding of why animals are where they are, and be very certain of where they aren't, so that we know that when stations are showing up here, we have a really good understanding of how long those stations were active, when they were recording, and making sure that we're confident in the zeros. And so we spend a fair bit of time discussing that as well, more or less trying to make sure that when people are using the tool, we're all getting the same results back, and we're all interpreting them in ways that make good sense.
Those are really good points. And I like the idea of doing some sort of SOP or kind of a workflow for different objectives. And that would fit really well into the Motus data framework document that accompanies the portal and the reports. So we'll definitely capture that and work on moving it forward. That's a really, really good suggestion.
There were a couple of comments to that end in our group about, having the calibration status of each station presented in the in the portal, so that people know kind of where what is the more actualized detection ranges of each of these stations, for example.
That's a super good point. Kind of on that point, we had some other suggestions within our group about including more station information into the reports, such as different, information around the specs of the antennas, model numbers would be helpful, elements gain, bearing, height above ground level, and then the beam width information horizontally and vertically, if that's known. I really like the idea of doing some sort of a calibration status. That would be super helpful. We talked about station downtime reports, which are really important for the offshore sites that may be subject to really harsh weather and not checked as often as some of the land-based sites. And then there was a really good point that was raised in our group around the usefulness of static reports for people that are going out in the field. So when we had talked about static reports among the project team, it was okay, if you need to attach, printout to a funding report or some kind of an annual report, then you could have something that was automatically generated, and that would be helpful. But we had talked also about kind of the use of these static reports like station maintenance logs, or if you had a crew that was going out to multiple sites, you could print out information about multiple stations, their locations, ports that correspond to antennas, any maintenance needs that those sites might have, and things like that. So I thought that was a really, really good point.
Yeah, it did come up in our group where people kind of felt like it seemed like for most purposes, the dynamic reports are fine, but that there was still a desire to have some way to convert that into a PDF if required.
And to that end, that the PDF reports can contain all of the information that is encapsulated in an HTML page, but obviously not necessarily dynamic.
Our group had a few additional sort of building off of some of what folks have said, one of which was maybe trying to show some, let's call it uncertainty or deficiencies in both sort of, say, on a species level for like tag coverage and on a tower level for maybe in a time period where tower coverage is sort of maybe better or on the other flip side lacking, so that if you're trying to interpret what's going on, and I know it shows it, but I think that they would like, there was some desire to have maybe even some more metrics for that somehow, and I don't know what that looks like, but and additionally, I think for some of the outputs, there was a comment about for a particular station, it will show origination by project for species, but they'd love to know origination by deployment location. So if you're if you're trying to sell to the higher, your boss or higher level folks, or even funders, like, just try and keep them interested, they might ask, like, where are those animals coming from? And so having sort of the ability to be able to report out where animals originated that pass through the towers might be a nice thing to have, if that's not already built in and we just haven't seen it yet. But and then let's see if there was something further. I think that was it for that at the moment. Oh, and there was one other thing, sort of an interesting suggestion. If there was a way to integrate, and this is definitely a higher level, but integrate with some of the data portals like NROC or Marco. And I think they're not thinking probably at a low level, but maybe at like, how some of these summaries might be produced to be outputted as a page. Maybe they could be tied in with NROC or Marco pages as another data layer. So that was kind of an interesting idea. That might be very complicated, but something to think about.
Yeah, the integration with other data portals was brought up in ours as well. In our case, the Northeast Oceans data portal was brought up. So we'll have to investigate what that might look like, or how best to do that.
Yeah, those are good comments. And I know that the portal has started to incorporate tracking data more from the product side. So for example, from the Boehm-funded diving bird study that BRI was a partner on, there were some dynamic Brownian Bridge movement models, but those were like finished products, right, from the final report. So the difference would be, would the portal be a good place to host these kind of QA/QC, but not fully finalized data? Are there any other quick comments? We're right at 2:55, which is our wrap-up time, but if there's any other quick comments.
There was a couple other comments related. I think it's actually in here though, is about being able to, once you've done all this filtering and getting down to the data you want, being able to export it. But I see there is a CSV button here, so I presume that's part of that's already incorporated here. I think the idea was just to be able to quickly turn that into an analysis or, basic analysis instead of going through R.
Another thing that was mentioned in our group, and it's something that we should talk about a little bit, is the idea of filtering tracks by geographic location. So even if there aren't any stations at a given, say, a prospective wind energy area, being able to draw a geographic area on the map in the Data Explorer and extract all of the information from the tracks, which are interpolated, right? We don't know for sure the animals went through that location, but trying to pull all of those data to understand what animals at least may have moved through a given location. And I could see the utility of that, but it also worries me a little bit because we don't know for sure that any of those animals actually went through that space. Yeah, something to, I think about a little bit.
Like one of those, yeah, including the site transition times, you'd have to include the speed of flight. So if it's moving extremely slowly, it's going to be a much more convoluted track or something that's going on there. So if you were to do something like that, looking for lines that cross a polygon, you'd have to include something like that kind of metric, right? The speed of movement, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that speed filter might be a really good solution, just as like a first pass on, did this bird go through this area, or does it have so much uncertainty that we can't really say anything for sure around that. So unfortunately, I hate to cut it off, but I want to be respectful of the time. So I'm just going to share my screen really quick and wrap things up so we can all jump off at 3. Thank you so much, everybody. This has been awesome. Let me just try to share my screen.
Oh, Pam, you're muted.
Thanks, Kate. Can you see my slide, the roseates? Cool. Rearrange some things. So just some next steps. So over the next couple months, we'll be developing and refining the Motus framework based off of everybody's awesome feedback from today. And then in spring of 22, we're going to follow back up with everyone who attended the workshop with opportunities to provide further input on the draft data framework and products. In the meantime, please feel free to reach out if you're conducting any offshore related Motus research and are interested in coordinating with the portal as it's being developed. BRI is also going to produce a summary report from the workshop, and we'll follow up with an email when it's posted on the project website. We'll be holding upcoming workshops on the monitoring framework in late winter, some calibration methods and workflow next spring, and the draft final study products next summer. And we anticipate release of the final study products next fall. We're a little bit behind schedule from the original project timeline due to some extra field work that we tacked on to field test things at Block Island, but looking forward to the release of the products that are field tested next fall. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for their participation today, and please feel free to reach out to us anytime if you'd like to follow up. Thanks so much, everybody. It was great seeing you all and really appreciate the great ideas that everyone shared.
Yeah, thank you all for the thoughtful feedback. This was terrific.
Thank you very much.